So today we are going to begin talking about the new American nation and the presidencies of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. This video is going to introduce us to what the United States was like in the years from about 1790 to about 1810, so the turn of the 19th century. We're going to look at its demographics, its population patterns, whether they're urban or rural, and we're also going to look at westward expansion and continued conflicts with Native Americans. So, as you know, the western border of the United States now is the Mississippi River, though it does not include Louisiana. And it has expanded westward, and these are some new territories, and we also see the creation of Vermont as a state. And this is actually going to create a lot of problems because people are going to want to settle in these areas, which are relative Indian territories. We're also going to have to deal with this question of slavery or not slavery. So what we're going to see is, yes, we have an expanded border, but in some ways this expansion into new territories is going to create conflict and drama. 80% of the population engages in some form of agriculture. So the primary economic activity of the United States at the turn of the 19th century is agricultural. But agriculture is very different depending on the location. So when you're talking about the South, we're talking primarily of growing these large-scale cash crops like tobacco, indigo, cotton at this point has been introduced, and the heavy reliance on slave labor. In the northern colonies, we're going to see agriculture mainly for food consumption locally and for selling at local markets. So we see smaller farms that are not as labor intensive and often focusing just on the family and does not rely on slave labor. I want you to understand that from the very beginning, there is this big difference developing economically between the North and the South. So South, incredibly agricultural, reliant on slave labor. The North, yes, it's still agricultural, but less dependent on agriculture, as well as less dependent on slave labor because the type of farming is vastly different in the North. The population of the United States around the year 1790 to 1810 is doubling about every 22 years. Now, this statistic is for the white population, and the reason we have more information on this is because we kept better census data on the white population. There are several factors for the rapid population growth. One is better life conditions, better nutrition, better economic systems, better living conditions. So people are living longer and fewer infants are dying. So a greater life expectancy as well as a lowered infant mortality rate. Also, there are factors like immigration, and families were just incredibly large. It was not unusual to see families with 7, 8, 9 children. 1/5 of the population was of African descent. The vast majority, 90% of African Americans lived in the South, and they lived in slavery. This was because of the Southern reliance on slave labor for these large agricultural plantations. There were Africans in all of the colonies, but not all colonies allowed slavery, and there was a greater percentage of freed Africans in the North than in the South. Nearly all cities in the fledgling United States were less than 5,000 people. Some notable exceptions include New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. Charleston is one of the only major urban centers in the southern colonies. The southern population is more widely distributed, certainly more rural, and towns tend to be smaller. Northern states, their urban centers tend to be larger, and their towns tend to be more highly populated. So what we're seeing again is this division between urban north and rural south. Another interesting demographic shift that we're seeing is rapid expansion over the Appalachian Mountains into the Mississippi River. In 1776, only 150 pioneers had permanent settlements in what would become the state of Kentucky. However, in 1790, the United States sees 75,000 pioneers in what will be Kentucky. At this point, it's still part of Virginia. So we're seeing this rapid expansion westward. And there are a lot of factors for that we're going to look at. And it's also going to cause problems. At this point that we're talking about in 1790, these are not states, they are territories or are claimed by other states, such as Virginia or Georgia. But again, the population west of the Appalachian Mountains and in towards Mississippi River is growing very rapidly. Now, there are a lot of factors fueling expansion westward. One, again, this rapid population growth. More people, large numbers of people, it means that they are going to need more land. And so they are going to look for that land westward. Also, there is abundant cheap land west of the Appalachian Mountains, as long as you can fight for it. And another thing is increased economic activity. So the hope is by expanding westward, people will have the ability to better support themselves and their family and earn a little extra besides. Now, conflicts with Native Americans continue, and they'll continue for a long time to come. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which deals with the power to commerce, basically grants the national government the right to deal with Indians. Now, it doesn't say they have the right to tell Indians what to do, but it says that the national government has the right to engage in commerce and to make trade agreements with other countries and Indians. And because of this clause in the Constitution, it is assumed by the national government that the national government has the power then to enter into treaties and make agreements with Native Americans. State. And Knox, who is Secretary of Defense, they view dealings with the Native Americans akin to dealings with a foreign country. And their goal is peace preferable to war. So they would prefer not to enter into conflict with Native Americans, if at all possible. They would prefer to engage in treaties and work with the Native Americans as if they were a foreign country. Unfortunately, states don't agree with that. And so we are seeing this conflict developing, this push-pull, again between state and federal power. And on top of it, the British, who control Canada, they're actually arming Native Americans and kind of egging the conflict on. They're like, yeah, go kill those colonists. So again, we're seeing this push-pull between federal versus state power. We're seeing a lot of regional sectionalism develop this push-pull between the North and the South. And we're also seeing that westward expansion is great, but it is causing conflict. So there are a lot of positives and negatives going on during this turn of the century period.